All right. Well, people are still coming in. We'll continue to admit them as they come up. But good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Mitigation Working Group of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. I'm Mark Stewart, Climate Change Program Manager at MDE. Do note that we are recording this meeting for note-taking purposes. Please mute your microphones unless you're trying to speak to the group. Great seeing so many people with us today. Are there any MWG members who are joining by phone, or is there anyone who's standing in for an MWG member today? Okay, seeing none. To everyone else, thanks so much for participating in today's meeting. We'll be sure to save some time later on for public comments. Let me turn things over to Mike Powell. Co-chair Kim Coble was unable to make it today. But Mike, do you have any opening remarks for everyone?
Just very briefly, one of the things we're going to talk about today is the pathways model, and I don't know how many people have had the time to drill through the 118 pages of it yet, but there's an awful lot in there and an awful lot that we're going to have to comment on as we go forward. And then obviously the other thing we're going to talk about is transportation. So we've got some very, very weighty subjects today, and we appreciate everybody's participation.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we were successful in releasing, in partnership with our technical assistance partners at the University of Maryland Center for Global Sustainability, the Pathway Report on June 30th, as required by law. So we were happy to have actually met that deadline. So the Pathway Report is out there. We're holding some time on today's agenda to have any further conversations that MWG members would like to have about it. Of course, if you've taken a chance to read it or at least skim it, you'll those of you who've been participating in these meetings will certainly recognize many of the graphs and findings, because of course our partners at the Center for Global Sustainability have been with us for the last several months presenting that information to the MWG. So the MWG had a real lead on that information. Couple updates, though, before we turn to the Pathway Report. Wanted to share that we were pleased to be joined by President Biden's National Climate Advisor, Ali Zaidi, a few weeks ago in Baltimore to announce that Maryland is joining the White House's National Building Performance Coalition. So very happy to be a member state in that White House initiative. And also just wanted to quickly share, this is a shameless plug, but some months ago I told you that we were going to hire new staff at MDE in the climate change program. The wheels of government have turned, and we actually have those positions now posted. So in case any of you are interested in helping us share the word about them, I will shamelessly share them with you in the chat. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about the Pathway Report. And we don't have any, unless Mike, you have any sort of particular lead-in or guiding questions here. I think the idea was mostly to just, open the floor to the members to discuss any reactions that you have to the contents of the report, any reactions that you have to really any of the content that's been shared with you all from the Center for Global Sustainability over the last few months.
Yeah, no, I think open questions. If people are a little reluctant, we can ask a couple of guiding questions to solicit comments. But why don't we start where you are? Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, Dr. Wright.
Yes. I was looking at figure 1.2, not too far into the report, and there are benefits claimed for health and the economy. And I guess I wasn't clear as to whose data source are we looking at, so that as time goes on, we can confirm or at least compare what we have achieved versus what was predicted. And somehow I didn't pick up what data sources we were going to use for that.
Yeah, it's a question. I'm trying to remember the health benefit analysis. Let me also see, I do see that Dr. Holtman is with us today. Nate, I'm not sure if Kathleen or others from your team were able to join, but is there anything about the health? Oh, I see. Hey, there you are, Kathleen. Nice seeing you. The health benefit analysis, could you refresh all of our memory on where that analysis came from and how what it was based on?
Sure. So the health benefits came from the EPA's COBRA model, which looks at the health benefits associated with co-pollution, primarily PM 2.5 particles. And so the dollar amount that's shown there in that particular figure you were referencing is a cumulative number for all of those health benefits monetized using the COBRA model. And those are also fed into the analysis done by the RESI team, Regional Economic Studies Institute at Towson, and they're the ones who did the overall economic benefits analysis.
I guess my question wasn't the model used for the prediction. My question was, how are we going to measure what actually happens? Who's going to be doing that to say that, I can't remember the number, 51 less whatever it was. So the question isn't what the prediction, how did we predict it? The question is, as time marches on, who are we going to rely on to report back that, yes, we're achieving these benefits and here's what we have to date? Is that clear in my question?
Yeah, it is, Bob, and that's a really important flag. And frankly, some of what we need to do as we pivot toward the development of the final plan is think about implementation, successful implementation of all the measures in the plan that's due at the end of this year. You know, as a reminder to everyone, the pathway report, which came out in June, is sort of phase one of this two-phase process this year of initially having, you know, kind of the big picture overview of what is necessary to achieve the emissions goals. And then in the state's plan, we need to get a little bit more granular in terms of thinking about some of the supporting architecture to make sure that we have successful implementation. So we have a process set up, you know, as we conduct our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, of course, of being the official tracking and record keeping. Is Maryland achieving its emission goals? But there, as you're pointing out, Bob, there are a lot of other important metrics to track. And I think that there's some work that we have to do ahead to make sure that we're tracking. And as we develop our progress reports, you might recall some months ago, we shared our GGRA plan progress report with you all, tracking some what we called key progress indicators. You know, health benefits were not among that list, but it's a good flag to think about how to incorporate that into our kind of continuous monitoring and improvement plan. Other comments or reactions? I also see that we're joined by some of our commission members. Delegate Stein, wonderful seeing you. Beth Harbor, perhaps others. So yeah, Delegate Stein, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And well, I can't say I made it through the entire report, made it through most of it, but it's very impressive, and I can appreciate the sort of all of society approach that's strongly recommended as part of the Maryland climate pathway, especially to get to our 2045 target of net zero emissions. I guess my question is on the 2031 goal of 60% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. With respect to sort of the full suite of recommendations, will MDE be prioritizing which ones in particular, or what percentage of them would need to be accomplished to hit the 60% goal by 2031?
Yeah, some of the work that we have to do, and this is going to continue to be done in partnership with the Center for Global Sustainability, is to figure out, or to estimate at least, the emissions impact of specific policies that will be in the state's plan. So there's a requirement that the final plan specify the emissions reductions kind of on a policy by policy basis. So that's some of the work that we're going to be doing ahead. And I'll just expand. Connected to that is, and also I should have added it as an announcement. I think I've shared previously that Maryland was the first to apply for the $3 million grant from the US EPA called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. So we were happy to be, first in the nation to get our forms in for that one. We're in the process of receiving that money. One requirement of that grant program is that in March 2024, we need to submit a list of priority GHG reduction projects to the EPA, which becomes essentially the application for the competitive part of that grant program to then seek funding to implement some of those priority measures. So the work that we're going to be doing in the next few months as we hone in on the policies that will be part of the state's plan is to also think of the prioritization of those policies, because by March we need to have essentially the prioritized list for funding for this competitive EPA grant program. Ian.
But I think more general, I mean, that's good context, but right, I think the other takeaway message, right, is that we have to prioritize, of course, but there isn't really margin in that pathway report. It isn't like there's a lot of different ways that we're going to get to 60% and we can sort of pick and choose. It's sort of, we're going to have to really kind of do all of it to some extent. And they're right. I mean, there may be ways that there may be different policies, that get higher emphasis or refinement, right? But the general framework is there. And it's not like we can say we're not going to tackle certain things and then we're just going to miss the mark, I think, right? I mean, that was my takeaway. It wasn't like there were a bunch of different pathways, right? There was a narrow path identified to meet the requirements.
I think that's speaking for our partners at CGS. I think that's one of the reasons they pivoted from calling it pathways to pathway report, because there is a fairly narrow path to achieve the 60 by 31 goal. Let's see, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, one concern I have, and I think it deserves some discussion, is on the cap and trade. And the concept of applying that to a small state, I think there's potential for a lot of leakage. And I don't know how much thought has went into how much that can occur. By leakage, that's the term where instead of a product being made and the greenhouse gases being generated in Maryland, maybe they're generated in York, Pennsylvania, and then the product used here. So to what extent will we be simply exporting greenhouse gases elsewhere? How do we deal with that in a cap and trade? RGGI is a regional system. California is a much bigger state when they try to do it. I'm concerned about our ability to effectively do that without harm to the economy if we're doing it as a state only.
Maybe I could weigh in a bit on that. If we end up pursuing that, Mike, we there are a couple different ways that you address that. One narrow part of your question is that for like manufacturing, something where we'd actually be building something either in Maryland or in York, an approach is that states identify what they call energy intensive and trade exposed industries. And so for those types of facilities, they're actually treated differently under the program and given their allowance obligation for free, so that they don't face that competitive pressure if they are in fact trade exposed in that way. And as you know, Mike, our climate law effectively would, if we were to apply that program today, we would effectively have to do that for manufacturing in order to comply with the manufacturing specific provisions in the old Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. So that's one thing, that for an actual manufacturing facility, that's, for example, how California does it to address that concern. And then the other thing that, for example, we do in RGGI is by making investments in the greenhouse gas reductions we want to see here to achieve that cap, we can make the cap, we can comply with the cap by the doing the in-state investments and the in-state reductions rather than relying on that process you described where it's sort of pushing stuff outwards. So you can proactively make the in-state things happen, the in-state things you want to see happen by investing directly in them through a cap and invest program rather than straight cap and trade.
But two reactions to that, right? In a small state, there are going to be a lot more things that can be exported across the border. I mean, manufacturing is an example, but I mean, there's no place in the state that's not 45 minutes from a state border. So just about any carbon producing system can be moved. And in terms of the money being spent, your assumption assumes that we very carefully target the money and that money's not used for any other purpose other than greenhouse gas reduction. That wasn't the history of RGGI when it was first passed. And so I think if this works only if the money is very carefully targeted, then it needs to be very clearly said that the diversion of the money to any purpose other than greenhouse gas reduction sort of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, I think there's more nuance there. It's not quite so black and white, but yeah, I think it's definitely fair that such a program would have to be designed with clear investment purposes in mind, including securing in-state reductions and also, providing things like rebates to consumers, which is a big focus of New York. I heard they're writing a cap and invest regulation right now.
I see hands up from Jamal and Jared. Go ahead, Jamal.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I had a couple of comments, but the first is, I thought that this report was very well done. I really appreciated the attention to detail. I appreciated the, case studies from various parts of the state. I thought that was really important to include. And I, really appreciated the focus and thought and intention put towards equitable solutions as well. And I just thought that was really, it was really important to see that here, because as we are pursuing the pathway to reach our climate goals, we're going to need to do it equitably. And so to have sections like that with thoughts and ideas for how to do that, I thought was really valuable. I'll just note two things that I took away two things I want to raise here. One is under the fossil fuel section, I just want to point out that as part of the pathway, there is an assumption that natural gas usage is going to decline. And I think that raises all sorts of questions about what we're going to do with the infrastructure. And there is some mention of that, but I wanted to raise that for the group here, that assumption is present. And that is, an issue that we're going to have to deal with, as the consumption is declining. The second point that I wanted to raise was part of the building section, which is, there was substantial talk about the Empower program as it currently stands. And I know that there are processes in place to see how we modernize the Empower program to be inclusive of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. I would have loved to see the impact of that incorporated, though I recognize that it's hard to model that when it's unclear how that's going to work and it's unclear what the commission is going to do. So, but that will have an impact on the emissions reductions of buildings, given that that's the core program for building upgrades in the state. So those are the 2 points that I wanted to raise, but just kudos to the team that worked on that.
Thanks. Yes, I shared the kudos to Nate, Kathleen, the whole team at CGS. They've been wonderful collaborators with us in this. You might recall, others might recall here that the mitigation working group had recommended utility transition planning with a focus on this gas system transition planning issue a couple years ago, and its building energy transition plan. I believe the Climate Commission again last year had a recommendation around, you know, a PSC-led planning process for gas system transition planning. So, yeah, that's you know, something good to flag it again, Jamal, and something that this group and the commission have discussed quite a bit in the past. Let's see, Jared.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to comment. Just a quick question, and I guess full disclosure, I'm still making my way through the new report. So just kind of checking to see what's changed. And I think this has been discussed in maybe a prior meeting, but just generally how this report works with, you know, cost to ratepayers. You know, if there's going to be, you know, kind of like an expansion upon that in the future, just, you know, the cost of some of these possibilities. Just something, yeah, we're curious about. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the GGRA plan, the state's current GHG reduction plan, does have some rate impact analysis connected with it. That wasn't part of the scope of work for the pathway report, but obviously ratepayer impacts, you know, front and center in our minds as we think about these new policies.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that'll be more in like the year-end report.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I might have been breaking up, but that ratepayer impacts analysis will be more in the year-end GGRA report.
To the degree it's possible. You know, there are challenges with a lot of different policies and the modeling time that we have to develop the final plan.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. We have, let's see, just 2 or maybe just a minute or so left for this agenda topic before we're going to turn to MDOT's carbon reduction strategy. Any additional questions or comments about the pathway report?
Mark, this is Mark Shebus from OPC on the phone. Sorry, I can't raise my hand, but can I weigh in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, thanks. And I want to echo first all the compliments for the good work done on the report. Like a previous commenter, I haven't actually made my way entirely through it, but there's a ton of good work done here. So well done on that. I just want to build briefly, because I know we don't have much time on Jamal's comment regarding gas transition issues. I agree that the report tees up the issues in a pretty good way, but I think it leaves things hanging in a way that is not satisfying to OPC, given the work that we've done on some of these issues. We've done a couple reports which are available on our website, and I can share them with folks who haven't seen them, that really dig into the numbers and the implications of proceeding on a business as usual trajectory regarding gas system. And on the recommendation that the PSC initiate some sort of process and formal discussion to take on these issues. We've actually filed a petition at the PSC that would create such a process, and the PSC is taking comments on it now. And I think we would have liked to see some of that referenced, and maybe it's on me not to have raised those reports and analyses enough for MDE, but I think it's probably not too late to do that, because there is a lot of really good analysis here that I think this report could point to, in addition to saying that more analysis is needed, because we don't deny that, but we think we've already done quite a lot that's relevant to these discussions.
Great points, and we can things for my team to keep in mind, work toward the development of the final plan. Garrett.
Thanks, Mark. Garrett Fitzgerald with Montgomery County. So yeah, I just want to echo what's been said about the quality of the report. I think this is very, very useful starting point for us. One thing that jumped out to me, the piece that talks about Empower and about energy savings from buildings, we kind of separate the concepts of energy savings in buildings from the concepts of the grid getting greener, from the concepts of other things we might need to do to enable electrification. I think we all know there's been discussion around the future of Empower, of maybe shifting to a greenhouse gas focused goal rather than an energy savings focused goal. And I think there's potential. I was surprised to see that in the one pathway we're offering, we have a kind of a one concept for the magnitude of the energy savings we'll get through Empower. It does seem to me like there might be potential to get additional energy savings, or if we were to reframe what we do with Empower around greenhouse gas as the primary goal. Right now, the PSC has asked all the utilities to model 3 different versions of plans for achieving greenhouse gas savings based on 3 different goal levels. There's the kind of the continuation of the business as usual, but there's also the what if we went after all of the greenhouse gas savings potential that appears to be cost effective that we think we could actually achieve across the building stock in Maryland. What would that look like? What would that require? What would that cost? I feel like there is a sort of a second scenario that's quite different from business as usual, that I would be curious about what the cost will end up looking like there, and if some other piece of this overall pathway doesn't come to fruition, I'd argue there might be a pathway to make up some of that difference through a greater degree of greenhouse gas savings. So I'm curious to kind of dig into that a little bit more. The one other thing I would note is, I think the report lays out the pathway to get there. One thing we will all have to do is wrestle with, how do we pay for all of this? And there are some pretty significant barriers within the respective sectors and the respective kind of policy concepts that are here, that I think it would be ultimately very useful if a report like this included some content recognizing some of those challenges and some of the things that need to be worked through, even if it doesn't end up providing specific policy recommendations for how we will pay for something. If it cues up the importance of solving this and solving that, that might help lead us to some future policy thinking in those areas, because I think that there are some things we'll have to resolve there, like how will we pay for the gas system moving forward? Like how will we replace the transportation trust fund, right? If we do see the big shift to electric vehicles and we're no longer having the gas tax, like some of these kinds of challenges I think are critical to resolve to enable some of the steps to move forward that are in the plan. And I think it'll be useful for a final version of the plan to recognize some of those things and kind of point at, the importance of solving for some of that through policy. But I really like what we have here and appreciate the work of the team on this.
Well, and I really appreciate, Garrett, you keeping the bar for our final plan in December at a reasonable level, because certainly we're not going to have all of the answers. And there are going to be areas in the plan where we are pointing to future planning and stakeholder processes to dive deeper into some of the big questions that are left over. So thanks for helping us communicate the realities of what we are able to get done in the next few months. Okay, so I don't think I see another hand up at this moment. I guess a last call for any comments on the pathway report before I ask our colleague Darren from MDOT to discuss their carbon reduction strategy. Yes, Cindy from IT. Oh, Cindy, I heard the telltale crackle. I think that your headset may have just flaked. Maybe you can put a comment in the chat, Cindy. Okay, well, Darren, good seeing you. Thank you for coming and talking about the carbon reduction strategy. Are you able and wanting to screen share, or do you want me to pull your slides up?
Let me see if I can do it, Mark.
Okay.
This will be the first time I've done this with Google Meet, so let's see. No, not there. Can you see it?
So we see, oh, and now it went full screen. Good, you're looking good.
Okay, super. Yeah, thanks very much for having me on the call. I'm Darren Lovas, and I'm the Chief of Environment and Sustainable Transportation at MDOT. I'm only, this is my third month at MDOT, so, but I'm happy to be talking about our carbon reduction strategy because I used to be an advocate for federal policy, and we were very excited that the carbon reduction program and its requirement that each state develop a carbon reduction strategy are in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the program itself, the strategy, eligible projects, coordination with MPOs, and then next steps beyond that. So first of all, the program itself. It's intended to reduce transportation emissions through the development of carbon reduction strategies and by funding projects to reduce emissions. It's specific to the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions from on-road sources in whichever state we're talking about. And of course, we're talking about Maryland here. In terms of Maryland, we get an estimated $94.3 million over 5 years, fiscal years 22 through 26. And that's federal highway formula funding. So this is kind of a noteworthy thing about this program, and it's a pretty big deal. It's a little akin to when CMAQ was established about 30 years ago to deal with air quality issues. Highway formula programs tend to be substantial and tend to stick around through multiple reauthorizations. So it's a big deal that this program is in law now. The program is administered by the State Highway Administration and coordinated across MDOT.
Darren, really quickly, I don't know if you are able to see this on your screen. Do you see where a little box is popping up that says Meet is sharing your screen and you can click hide?
Yes, just hide that. Oh, I see. It was
that was blocking a little text. Okay, that was great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mark. So for FY22, the apportionment to MDOT is $18.1 million. And then for FY23, it's $18.4 million. An additional wrinkle with this program is that 65% of it has to be sub-allocated to urbanized areas. And this is to make sure that metropolitan areas get their fair share of investment from the program. And the other 35% can be used anywhere in a given state. We're looking at having formula funding in hand for 22 and 23. All right. In terms of what's eligible, there's quite a bit in this program. First of all, the money's available to develop a strategy, which I'll go into in a minute. It's eligible for traffic monitoring, management, and control, traffic control facilities or programs. It's eligible to be flexed into public transportation projects. You can use it for on-road or off-road pedestrian and bike trails. You can use it for advanced transportation and congestion management technologies, for infrastructure-based intelligent transportation and vehicle-to-infrastructure systems, for energy-efficient street lighting, and traffic control devices replacement, for congestion pricing and to shift other means of shifting transportation demand for roads, for efforts to reduce the environmental and community impacts of freight movement, for diesel engine retrofit or deployment of alternative fuel vehicles, for emission reductions at ports, including through electrification, as well as other projects which can be deemed eligible if you can demonstrate that they're going to reduce transportation emissions. And as I said, the money can be flexed to the Federal Transit Administration and to the Maryland Transit Administration for transit investments. All right. In terms of the strategy, the carbon reduction program gives us an opportunity to identify and advance cost-effective emission reductions programs and projects. So we have this a federal formula program, and the legislation requires that we submit a strategy for how we're going to implement the program no later than November 15th of this year. And that is what we are working on right now. And these are the sort of the guardrails that we need to be aware of when developing the strategy, so it's a good fit for Maryland. And we need to identify projects and strategies to reduce emissions, which include safe, reliable and cost-effective options to reduce traffic congestion, to facilitate the use of vehicles or modes that result in lower emissions per person mile traveled as compared to existing vehicles and modes, to facilitate approaches to the construction of transportation assets that result in lower transportation emissions as compared to existing approaches. And actually, I'm reading off of talking points, and I'll summarize that a little more simply. Basically, we're looking at it in investments in better technologies, investments in ways to reduce vehicle miles of travel. We're looking at investments that reduce congestion, and we're looking at investments that increase the use of low carbon materials in construction. All right, so we also need to make sure to support the Climate Solutions Now Act, obviously. Whatever is in the strategy needs to be a good fit to Maryland's characteristics, including population density. This needs to be developed in consultation with the MPOs, and the projects should be identified in state transportation improvement programs as well as metropolitan transportation improvement programs, and be consistent with our long-range plans. And they need to support the Justice 40 initiative. So in the final analysis, the carbon reduction strategy will be certified by the US DOT Secretary. Now, there's a trick here, as folks have probably realized, namely, we're developing the strategy about 2 years into the program. So that's a challenge. We're sort of building the plane as we fly it in terms of strategy development. And for Maryland, there's an even bigger challenge, which is we're not going to have a plan for CSNA implementation until after we submit this strategy, which is why we plan to update the strategy next year. We're only required to update it every 4 years, but we're going to update it sooner than that because we realize it's going to have to be dramatically improved in the wake of what we find in the CSNA plan. All right, in terms of what's in the document, it was prepared following discussions with MPOs, and then we used MPO roundtable meetings as a check-in point. It's set up to draw the connection to existing carbon reduction programs and strategies, including a reference to the Mitigation Working Group, and to show that Maryland has a set of robust carbon reduction strategies in place. So we're not starting from scratch. That's the good news. It achieves the requirements for approval set out in federal guidance, and consolidates a lot of existing information that's been very informative, especially with new leadership and staff like yours truly, as we look to opportunities to further enhance our carbon reduction programs. So this is the timing challenge. We recognize that timing of submittal in November means that we're caught between other planning timeframes. First of all, this CRS has to be developed in coordination with the MPOs. So we had to start developing the document several months ago. And then it has to be synced up with what happens with the CSNA plan, as well as the updated Maryland Transportation Plan, which is also being updated in the second half of 2023. And both of those are going to be delivered after November when we submit this first CRS. So that explains why, if you read through the CRS, you'll note there's mostly a consolidation of existing strategies and a clear recognition that we're going to have to do an update in 2024. Yeah, so I guess that's what I'll say about that. One good thing actually to note is that because we're going through this CRS development concurrently with our work on the CSNA plan, this should help us as a sister agency to better inform what goes into the CSNA plan based on our work developing this strategy. And this is what I said earlier. These are the different buckets of strategies included within the wider carbon reduction strategy. So you have measures that focus first on transportation technology. So that's such as increasing electric vehicle market share, transforming MDOT's own substantial vehicle fleet, and promoting fuel efficient technologies for medium and heavy duty trucks. And then for VMT reduction, we're interested in increasing transit capacity and expanding service, TDM, transportation demand management, bike and pedestrian strategies, as well as working with MPOs on plans and programs that affect land use. Under congestion mitigation, Our strategies include freight and rail programs, on-road technologies for traffic management, and pricing initiatives. Under infrastructure design, we're working with local governments, and we're investing in improvements to provide choices and connections, and developing new tools for project development and prioritization, as well as looking for infrastructure improvements to facilitate multimodal connectivity. And then last, we're looking at emerging and innovative carbon reduction in, measures, and that this will be one area that hopefully will grow in our update next year, and that will be informed in part by development of the CSNA plan. So excited about that particularly. All right. So in the current strategy and for the first 2 fiscal years of this program, we're focusing on advancing existing projects that are already on the books, and the spending which has been coordinated with the MPOs and is in our consolidated transportation program. And we're also looking at developing new ways to track funds to be able to ensure that they result in carbon emission reductions, and to better report out on progress in the future. So going forward, this lays out the framework for optimizing the future funds to advance projects that have the greatest return on emission reductions, and that look for ways to move forward on some innovative strategies to help transform Maryland's transportation system. So it's super important to coordinate with MPOs on the development of the program investments, as well as on the strategy. And there's a need to incorporate what's in here with MPO long-range plans, as well as in TIPS, to aid in coordination of carbon reduction efforts across the state. That's crucial as a requirement for developing both the strategy as well as program investments. And beyond MPOs and local governments, we're looking to work with other partners in developing eligible projects as well. And the good news is there's already some mechanisms that facilitate work with local governments in Maryland, such as informing the development of our Consolidated Transportation Plan, or CTP, through letters that state what priority local projects are. And those projects are often included in the CTP, and then they're discussed during our annual fall tour. And last, MPOs and local governments are important partners in ensuring that carbon reduction projects benefit all Marylanders equitably. All right, so what's coming up next? We want to consolidate the comments we received from MPOs, and this has gone out for comment, and we're hoping to receive feedback by the end of the month. And then we need to revise this, and then finally submit it to USDOT for approval by the Secretary by November. Since this is a multi-year funding opportunity, we're also going to continue coordination with MPOs and local governments, including getting their input through fall tours and CTP priority letter processes. Lastly, we're going to update the CRS following the completion of major planning initiatives this year in order to further inform our carbon reduction path. And that is it. And that's me. I'm going to stop sharing now, if that's what I should do, right?
Yeah, thanks so much, Darren. So let's see, I see a hand up from Mike Powell. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'm interested in the criteria you're going to be using in evaluating the project. You outlined some of those. One of the things we've wrestled with is this tension, I would describe it, between projects that might have the fastest payback in greenhouse gas reduction and the importance of environmental equity. That some of the projects where we may get a fast bang for the buck don't necessarily support the communities that we're most concerned about. Do those factors weigh in your selecting of the projects?
Yeah, and that's the administration is going to be keeping an eye on that too, particularly the Federal Highway Administration, as well as USDOT, based on their Justice 40 initiative, right? So that's something that we, definitely need to account for. And if you review the strategy, you'll see there is a substantial equity section that talks about distributional equity across the state and how we've addressed that here. However, as I said, we'll be able to improve on that further in our update next year.
Got it.
Other questions or comments for Darren? Well, if we don't have any, then we may have even more time for our Sonia. Okay, go ahead, Sonia. Sonia, I don't know if you're talking, but it looks like you're muted. Sonia, you're still muted. I don't know if you're trying to talk to us or not. Okay, all right. So question will be coming in from Sonia. Any other questions or comments while we wait for that one?
If Sonia wants to put it in chat, we can answer it that way.
Yep. So she's asking, what's the timing for when you're looking for projects?
That is a good question, and the answer is both. This is I mean, I'll be candid. New project ideas and improving project selection, particularly for this program, are priorities. So we really need to put as many of new ideas in the hopper as possible. So we're going to be looking to obligate the first 2 fiscal years worth of spending pretty quickly, and then we have 3 remaining years. Although we should think beyond that, because these formula programs tend to get reauthorized. So this will probably be included in the next transportation law as well. This is likely to be around a long time, so we should make strategic use of it in Maryland.
Great. Any other questions for Darren? Well, Darren, thank you very much for that overview and for sharing the report with everyone here. We're going to continue on the theme of transportation, because the next bit of the agenda, which actually will take us all the way to public comments at the end, is the final recommendations of the phase 2 study conducted, funded by the Nature Conservancy, conducted by Energetics and VEIC. And I see Russ coming on camera. So Russ, can I hand this over to you?
Sure. Let's do this.
As Russ pulls up material, just wanted to give on behalf of the mitigation working group a thanks again to the Nature Conservancy for funding this project on behalf of the MWG. It's very generous contribution from TNC for this.
Okay. Are you able to see the screen?
We can.
Okay.
We're not seeing it full screen. I don't know if you're able to left. Although we can read it, so if
Okay.
you drop it on Justice, it's fine.
Yeah, I'll do it that way. Sorry, we have a funky PDF viewer that is hard to find that. So anyway, so thank you. So we only have 11 slides. We in previous talks we've had millions of slides and didn't really leave enough time for discussion. So the focus here was really giving the high level findings and executive summary level summaries of what was done. to allow for more discussion and input. So like Mark mentioned, definitely thanks to the Nature Conservancy for supporting the project and giving guidance for the project. And thank you. The project objective is sort of phase 2, essentially to take the phase 1 project, which is developing forecasts and projections for vehicle adoption and needs. This is all focused on light duty, and then developing a policy recommendation. So out of that, there were 3 different areas that seemed like an opportunity where where support from TNC could be used to expand on, and maybe it was things that weren't being done elsewhere. So really, ZEV focused dealer engagement initiative, or so low income ZEV purchase incentives and programs, and then really fleet electrification technical support. So the project was organized in 4 different tasks. The first task was really sort of discussions and sort of presenting and getting feedback from stakeholders. Many are on this call, really. So what we're going to do is run through each one of the programs in the next couple of slides. There's only a couple of slides per. Energetics worked with VEIC. Program design is VEIC's expertise. So I will hand the first 2 programs over to Miriam from VEIC to give the overview. Miriam?
Yeah, thank you, Russ. And what I propose, if it works for everybody, is that after each kind of big topic, I can stop and take questions so that we make sure that we cover all of these. So let me start with the dealer engagement program. And again, this is high level overview. There is a big slide deck, and I'm happy to answer a question. But in a nutshell, why to start with a dealer engagement program is important, is that because dealers are really able to kind of demystify or do the contrary when it comes to misconception about ZEVs. So they are an important link when it comes to the decision that Marylanders make about their vehicle. There are also financial incentives. There is a federal tax credit at the minimum, so they are also the one who are charged with passing the financial benefit and explaining the both financial benefits to customers. The main objective of a car dealer engagement program is really to provide information and resources to those car dealers so that they can support customers and pass the benefit of ZEVs to them. What you will see is that a successful program, is kind of creating a network of car dealers, both of new and used vehicles, that are capable of selling and servicing those vehicles. And there are 2 aspects of things. There is the first aspect, that is you need accountability and you need to provide recognition for those car dealers when they are participating in the program. And at the same time, you need to provide the information and the support that they need to do what you want them to do. Yes, still, and thank you. Only 98 slides. So only 11 today. Some keys for success that we wanted to highlight today. The first one is really do not crowd out car dealers' bandwidth. I think it's important to recognize that there are trade associations, manufacturers are reaching to them. There are a lot of people who are reaching and engaging with them on ZEVs, so you want to make sure that you complement so that's not overwhelming. And that's going to be important for training, for example, because manufacturers might have training in place, or their organization nationwide might have both. So you want to complement efforts rather than supplement. Building partnerships is really important. We do believe that a car dealer engagement program needs to be designed, implemented, and evaluated with car dealers. And a good way to do that in an efficient way is to rely on dealer associations. So we have highlighted 2 there. The last one is, as you will see, the program recommendations are several program components. I think the most important thing is that those have to be one initiative, right? They can have multiple pieces and multiple components, but a bit like a concierge service, you want everything under the same umbrella to make it easy and make sure it's not complicated for car dealers to participate. The last one that I will point to, and it's going to be a recurring theme, is that car dealer engagement on one end. Programs targeted at customers, they need to work together and they need to be designed together, right? It's one big initiative with two arms, customer facing side and car dealer facing side. If you can go to the next slide, Russ, please. So in terms of what we recommend to have in the program, there is the entire enrollment, recognition, and oversight dimension of the ideas that you can have participating dealerships that are promoted via a customer-facing campaign. And the added value when you do that is that then you can tell dealers, if you participate, you have a chance to have some customer leads, right? We're going to connect you with customers who are interested. In terms of oversight, we are providing some ideas in the full report of how to make sure that dealerships are passing the full benefit of customer incentive directly to the end user, because this is a legitimate concern, right? There is always that concern about if there are incentives, at least for federal tax credit, how do you make sure that the full benefit of those go to the end user and don't stay with car dealers? There is a training and educational part in the recommendation. Again, the idea is to complement the existing. And we do think that there might be some gap that Maryland could address when it comes to the specific needs of independent and used car dealerships, right? The dealerships who work with big brands have the support of a manufacturer. It's not really the same for independent car dealerships. We also think that a car dealer guidebook that consolidates all the information they need could be useful. Having customer-facing material will be the same, and this is where you see the tie between the customer part of the market and the car dealer part. We are proposing 3 types of financial incentive. The first one is a sales incentive, about $200 incentive per sale for a Maryland vehicle, be it used or new. And the idea is to have at least half of that incentive to be passed through the dealership, but directly to the salesperson. We do believe that in year 2, you might want to cap the number of incentives per dealership. For car dealers to access that sales incentive, their enrollment in the bigger program will be mandatory. There is a training incentive that could be a one-time $200 incentive, again, provided to the sales, at least half to the salesperson. And here again, we recommend that, to be able to access that incentive, the enrollment in the car dealer program will be mandatory. And the last one is the readiness incentive for electric vehicle supply equipment investment that we propose at up to $50,000, but only to independent used car dealers. Again, because we do believe that other types of dealerships are receiving support from manufacturers, and so we could target those specific businesses. We have provided an estimated incentive budget in the report. We are between 19.5 million for a 3-year program. If we have EV readiness incentive, 17 without, based on some assumptions and calculations that are in the full report. So let me stop here on the dealer engagement piece and see if there are any clarifying questions. And comment, if that's okay for you, as I guess we can take comments at that point too.
Yeah, Delegate Stein.
Thank you. Miriam, I saw in the full report that the Auto Dealers Association had expressed interest in this type of dealer engagement program. So I just wanted to ask if you we're aware of the extent of the discussions with the association, where they stand?
Forrest, do you want to share?
Sure. We had one discussion with the dealer association and just sort of about both the fleet side and about the dealer engagement program. In general, they were supportive of anything that would, you know, get salespeople more funding, you know, and just more information. We'd intended to have, or we tried to have, follow-on discussions with individual dealerships with the dealer association on the calls also, but those never happened. So it was essentially, you know, one call that we had for them. They were very supportive of all this. We're definitely interested in, you know, supporting anything that comes out of this, you know, but we just weren't able to get any more like engagement with them during the project, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Sonia's in the chat here. Are there any examples of failed dealer engagement programs across the country? Two very key issues to solve for our dealers and salespeople make the most money on volumes of car sales, and currently EV sales are still low, and high turnover salespeople undermines education efforts. So Miriam, are you familiar with any dealer engagement programs that are active or have experienced any challenges in the country right now?
Trying to think, I think those are valid point. I think, you know, in Vermont, Efficiency Vermont has been able to run a car dealer engagement program, but I think it might be too soon to share results or, you know, like an evaluation of that program. But I think, you know, those concerns are legitimate, and we need to address them and trying to. I would say that those are things and barriers that we'll want to address or take into account in the program design, right? I do believe you still need a car dealer engagement program so that, you know, customers can navigate everything. And we're going to talk about the low income incentive, but you know, if you want to be able to really push the envelope on equity, you're going to need car dealers to play an important role in that. So I think those are important barriers that need to be addressed within program design. I would just add that I still believe that you need a solid car dealer engagement effort to make sure that, you know, you have equitable benefit distribution of the benefits of the EVs.
I can add a little bit to that also, Miriam. Dylan Voorhees with the EIC. I think there are lessons. I think might not go to say they're failed programs, but tactically, there certainly have been tactics that programs have tried and have been adjusted. So in Vermont, for example, which has one of the more robust dealer engagement programs, there have been changes to the program over time. Adjustments to incentive levels to really be more impactful, as an example. And there are design elements that we've recommended here that are meant to address some of these. So sales people with a lot of pressure on their time, a lot of turnover, all of those are reasons why we recommend subsidizing and in fact giving an incentive to get salespeople into trainings. It's not enough to just say, hey, there's a training that is going to happen. If you're a new car dealer and you might only be in that job for a year and you're selling mostly ICE cars, it's just not enough to sort of have it out there. You need to really pull people, and that's a lesson that I think is coming from other programs. So I concurring with Miriam, those are barriers and examples and tactics and lessons that have come from other places as well, and they're very real.
I wonder, I know that the context of all of phase two is looking at really the low to moderate income support structure that's needed. And I don't remember this stat, and if I learned it from your phase one study, but read somewhere that in terms of new car sales, like new car sales are it's like more than 80% of people who buy new cars are middle income and high income, right? They're not in the low to moderate income class. So does that mean that in this context, that the dealer engagement strategy is more focused on the used car dealers, or do you see that it doesn't much matter? Like there's a value in having this be open to used car, new car, and of course there are plenty of dealers that deal in both.
So I would start, and Dylan can complement. That's the value of having him today, as well as we have designed and made recommendations for a car dealer engagement that is not income specific. And at the same time, we have made recommendations with in mind that we're designing for an incentive program, right? So for example, if we think about equitable access and people with lower income level, they are most likely to go to a used car dealer, right? So we kept that in mind for our engagement. And this is why, for example, for the readiness incentive, we are saying, yes, if equity is front and center and you're going to be trying to support low and moderate income households, you need to integrate that when you're designing your car dealer engagement and push the envelope on how do you bring those car dealers on board, right? I would almost say, candidly, everything that is difficult to engage with car dealers that work with specific manufacturers on new vehicles is probably going to be harder to engage with used car dealers and independent car dealers, right? Because they might not be as on board with the EVs than others, right? Or at least it's an important question to discuss. And this is also why we are saying any program needs to be designed with those car dealers, because we still don't know enough about what is important for them, what is their attitude or their perception towards the EVs. And that's also why, that there is that strong key for success recommendation is make sure that anything that get implemented, get really designed with their input, so that again we can just learn, we can come up with what we think are good ideas, and I'm going to tell us, no, it doesn't work for us, and then we'll be able to understand why. Am I answering your question, Mark?
Yeah, you are. Thanks. Yeah, Mike.
Before Mike goes, can I just add a clear clarification? So you'll see on the bottom of this slide the term independent used car dealers. So just wanted to be clear, because as you said, Mark, many new car dealers also sell used cars. We use that term independent used car dealers to be dealers that aren't associated with a manufacturer that are selling new cars. So exclusive used car dealers who are only selling used cars. And as Miriam said, we sort of want to go harder and engage further with those. And one of the ways in this recommendation would be to provide those financial incentives for equipment, charging equipment, and to do that for the independent used car dealers rather than for the OEM car dealers. So that's probably the best example where some additional incentive is important for those dealers. Sorry to cut you off.
I was just going to add that, I mean, the points raise an interesting question, which is, at least in the early years, there's not going to be that much inventory of used EVs, right? I mean, right now our percentage of EVs in Maryland is very low. We're not California. We're planning on ramping up quickly, but I don't anticipate having substantial numbers for the initial years, and a lot of those will be kept on the lots of the new car dealers who will accept them in trade-in and then resell them because they've already got the infrastructure. So I do think in designing this and deciding how we pass them out, as much as I normally would favor heavily weighting it toward an independent used car dealer, we may need to take into account what the market is as to where those incentives go, at least in the early years.
That said, I've been doing some car shopping myself. If any of you are in the market for a Nissan Leaf or i3, I mean there are a good number of nice used EVs that are available right now. And if you are income qualified and get it for less than $25,000, you'll get $4,000 back from the federal government. Thank you, Uncle Sam. Maybe we put a pin in the dealer engagement program and then go to the next of your 3 recommendations. Thanks, Jamal, for all that.
So moving to an equity program, we thought it was important to kind of talk about what is the objective of a program. Really, the premise for having an equity incentive program is to make sure that we can, make sure that households who have limited financial resources can still access more reliable vehicles, reduce their transportation costs, especially, and that's the focus, when they are car dependent. And that's something that that you're gonna see in the report. We're already trying to address or actually acknowledge that, that program is not meant to be in competition or supplement other clean transportation program, right? It's recognizing that some households are still going to be car dependent no matter what we do on the public transportation side, and that you want to be able to provide the benefit of the EVs to those households. Another point that is important is that an incentive program must work hand in hand with an EV charging infrastructure program. So it was out of scope for us to design for charging, but it's definitely for a program is fair and implementer important to make sure that both things get designed together. Some keys for success that we highlighted is first the word stacking, but a lot of us are using more and more, right? The idea is that you want to make those vehicles financially accessible for households who have limited financial resources. It means that you really need to make sure that everything can be stacked and combined together. That means the federal tax credit, any sales tax exemption, and sufficient state incentives. Building partnerships is, again, something that we feel strongly about, even more so in that instance, because you need to be designing as a junction between, climate policy and social policy, right? And so the ecosystem of stakeholders needs to be broader than climate change. It really also needs to include stakeholders that are more focused on the social dimension of the transportation issue. And we do believe that, any further implementation plan needs to be developed with the input of our stakeholders. Unfortunately, we had a really short time frame to do our engagement, so we feel like we could have done more when it comes to collecting those input, and recommend that a program is fair or implementer really adopt that approach. One that is important too is that really to target outreach efforts, really building on community-based marketing and community-based approaches, building on a network of trusted messengers, and ensuring that the marketing is adapted to households with limited financial resources. I would add, though, that it's important to account for the diversity of the equity segment, right? Sometimes when we design with equity in mind, we only have the income level in mind, but when it comes to limited financial resources, we are talking about really diverse people in age, in perceptions, in attitude. So it's important to keep that diversity in mind for any marketing efforts. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of what the program will look like. As I mentioned, the idea is it wouldn't be a criteria, but the idea is really to focused outreach efforts on Marylanders who are in living areas and those households that are highly car dependent. We have set eligibility to incentive program at 80% of the area median income, which represents an income of about $90,000 per year for a 4-person household. And that's about 28% of the Maryland population. We have recommended what we may call a low income adder, which is that if you earn less than 60%, you get an additional incentive, right? And so 60% of AMI is about $70,000 for a 4-person household. On the income verification process, we strongly recommend self-certification. So, household saying, yes, I do qualify, and just, going through spot checking audits in terms of enforcement, if this is a concern. When it comes to how to deliver those incentives, as for the federal tax credit, really make sure that this has to be a midstream market transformation program. So it's at the point of sale through participating car dealers. And it will be important for any incentive program to be really compatible with leasing financing, because it's most likely to be one of the preferred model for an equity market segment. We recommend that it be provided in tandem with the sales tax exemption and set to be operate for 4 years. So as I mentioned, the idea is to have a market transformation program, as we do, for example, for energy efficiency through Empower. For a market transformation program, what you need more than anything is certainty, right? For market actors to really be able to ramp up, to get into it. So to have at least 4 years, and then what you really want to avoid, and it's better, it's easier said than done, is the stop and go effects that we sometimes see, right? But you have incentives available, but then you run out of budget, and it kind of stop and go the market. And we recommend that the budget be set in a way that avoids that effect. For the type of vehicles that will be eligible, our main recommendation is to align with what the federal tax credit is doing, so that you can ensure that the stacking is working, and to be sure that used vehicle and plug-in electric would be eligible, just because they're financially more accessible for households with limited financial resources. Next slide, please. So the final slide, these are the dollar amount that we have come up with. The way we structured our recommendation is so that the transportation cost will not exceed 10% of a household budget. And that 10% figure is what is deemed to be affordable transportation cost. Now we speak candidly, but this is not what low-income Marylanders are paying. They are paying way more towards their transportation costs as of today. But that's the approach that we chose to take. You see the difference between new and used vehicle, and the difference with the low-income adder in that table. We looked into opportunities for financing, and we had conversation with the Maryland Clean Energy Center, who has expressed an interest in continuing those conversations. So you will find some recommendations in that report. We do believe that what will make the most sense would be to underwrite the risk associated with a customer default. That will be, for example, a loan loss reserve, or to have a financial product that could mitigate the risk of late payment, right? Sometimes when you have limited financial resources, it's not that you're completely defaulting on your payments. For example, for a lease, it's just that you're paying late. So you might want to have a financial product that gives that breathing room to households to pay later. Final point in terms of integrating with other ZV's incentives, as mentioned, the integration with car dealer engagement is critical, as it is for charging infrastructure. And as we mentioned, also, just investment in clean and accessible public transportation for non-car dependent households, so that policies are working hand in hand and not in competition, for lack of better word. Was provided an estimated incentive budget there. We used the Advanced Clean Car 2 policy scenario that we had in phase 1 when it comes to volume of sale. And so this is how we came with, if you were to provide 100,000 incentives, that will cost you $625 million over 4 years. So let me stop here and take questions and comments, Mark.
So we've got a couple of related comments in the chat regarding essentially the housing types most commonly utilized by low-income residents in the state and the associated charging opportunities and needs. So any sort of reaction to how EV ownership fits into the different types of housing that our low-income residents tend to occupy?
So I think this is where we have made recommendation on, if you want to be able to provide financial incentive to those households, you need to address the charging issue, especially in multifamily housing. But it's in multifamily housing, it's also, you might need to think about panel upgrade, depending on, even in single family, right, you might need to work on panel upgrade. So there might be some synergies to be found with, energy efficiency and electrification programs. So those are important synergies that we have pointed out to. And, also charging at your place of work. So let me stop here and see if Dylan wants to add something to that.
I guess only to emphasize the point that EVs and in fact vehicle ownership are not necessarily the most successful transportation solution for any Marylanders, including low-income Marylanders, and that transportation alternatives are important and were not the focus of the study. And I would assume that there is correlation between housing types and car dependence. And as Miriam has said, that's our focus here is trying to meet the needs of folks who are car dependent. And so I think it's an excellent question, and it would be even more sort of complex and valuable if you focused on what are the housing types of car dependent low income households. And we don't have that information, but I think that's important, because that would not be the same answer as you said, where do low income households live and what types of housing. So that's just going to emphasize that point, and then also just emphasizing that charging solutions needs to happen in parallel. Again, I'm repeating, but it's really worth repeating. Purchase incentives, that's an important part, but the charging piece is at least as important.
I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand. I'm driving. This is Nicola Tran for DHCD. I just wanted to add maybe some information to this housing discussion, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So statewide, approximately 60% of households live in single-family housing versus in 40% in multifamily housing, but it varies greatly by different areas. Obviously, in metropolitan areas, it's very different ratio than in rural areas. So that's something to consider, and then we can provide some numbers on that since we just did that analysis for our program plan. And then the other thing to consider and where the integration with the energy efficiency programs comes in is that there's a lot of electrification efforts going to be happening on the housing side over the next couple of years. And a lot of those electrification projects will include panel upgrades. And there are different panel upgrades necessary for just a simple heat pump conversion versus equipping a house for future potential EV panels as well. So that's probably a need there to coordinate with the building programs to consider to what size the panels should be upgraded to accommodate for any future additional EV charging stations.
Thanks, Nicola. And I might have missed it, and I think you probably said it, but that statistic about 60% of residents being in single-family housing versus 40% in multifamily, was that specifically the low to moderate income population, or the housing covered by DHCD, or was that is that a statewide number that does not take income into consideration?
I will have to get back to you on that. That's just the number I remember. I don't remember if that was the limited income portion or the statewide portion.
Okay, that's interesting and helpful. All right, thank you. Okay, yeah, Mike.
Yeah, well, just a comment on that before I ask my question. To some extent, the best border or measuring is not whether it's single family or multifamily, but whether it has dedicated parking. Because a row house in eastern Baltimore that has on-street parking has similar problems to a multifamily, and condos which have dedicated parking spaces may be a little bit less challenged than apartment houses with general. But the question I had is on the 155 million a year. Do you envision it being 155 each of the 4 years, or do you envision a ramp up, a ramp down? Is it a steady amount? Do we assume that we need to be putting more incentives in the early years to accelerate, or do we assume that we go up as sales of EVs go up?
So for now, our recommendation is that the amount that a customer could have 7,000, between 3,000 and 11,500 will be the same amount over 4 years, right? So that will give you stability about and certainty about what the amount is. Now, and Dylan has the experience also that he can share, is that most of our programs are going to ramp up, right? So you might, we touched on all the obstacles that you have to overcome in combination, right? So we have provided an average, but for budget purposes, I would imagine that you have a ramp up and you have a peak. What we did is that we stopped at 4 years because then you want to see how is the market, right? Do you still need incentives? Maybe the answer is no, we don't, right? Maybe you have reached your market transformation objectives. But for our recommendation, the amount that you can access is the same. And we recommend, again, that the budget be for 4 years so that, you don't go through the stop and go where at the end of a year, you don't have any, kind of budget left. Because this is usually where you start losing car dealerships, right? And where you start losing customers and creating kind of lack of satisfaction with the program because you engage people.
It's the problem we got now, that the money that's there is going to be exhausted very quickly. And so it may actually be discouraging rather than encouraging, because if you walk in there in the third month, there may be no money.
And I would add that usually what we have seen too is that, the early adopters tend to be the households with higher income, or there is a correlation too. So the stop and go also tend to be correlated with higher income households accessing those benefits, right? Because the harder to reach customers that are the equity customers you want to engage with are just going to take longer for the program to reach out and engage with. So if you have that stop in the middle, you're not going to be able to serve those others to reach customers.
And another way of putting that is that you've reduced the impact of the program. And so if you've giving somebody an incentive is not the same as an impact. An impact is something that happened that wasn't going to happen already. And that the characteristics that Miriam's described are incentives that are predictable and predictable across the year, predictable a year from now. Maybe you're thinking about a year from now. You're thinking about where you're going to be housing. You're thinking about buying an ICE vehicle. Those predictability and are associated with impacting the customers that you want to impact, as opposed to providing an incentive to somebody who happened to be doing the thing you wanted them to do, and they were going to do that, and now they just are paying a little bit less. You've made transportation more affordable for populations that have generally transportation affordability issues. So in some ways, the concern about free ridership is probably less in this program, where you are in fact providing a transportation affordability benefit potentially, as well as a climate benefit. So even if that person was going to buy an EV potentially already, you've actually had some impact in a different kind of way. I know that's not the climate objective here, but these are connected. And then finally, the year-by-year budget is in the full report, and it's associated with, as Miriam said, the ramp up associated with advanced clean car. So you can see what the 155 actually would be over 4 years if you were on that pathway.
Just to address one other thing that I should have mentioned at the beginning of this part of today's agenda. This came up in relationship to the discussion around the phase 1 study results. Just to be clear for everyone, the idea here is not to move the entire population into cars, right? That we are investing in public transit and bike infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure, and everything else. There are significant investments in that. The state has bold plans to continue investing in those things. The idea is, of course, that we have a number of people in our community who are car dependent and who do rely on cars. So this is all about focusing on, for those people, how do we see that we increase access to zero emission vehicles?
Mark, it might be worth just adding to that, though, that DOT has told us that it seems to be great resistance to increasing ridership on public transportation. And so one of the things you have to weigh is, for the dollar invested, is it easier to get ridership up on a bus or replace a car? I don't think the answer is that clear.
I know there's one more program design component that you want to present, so maybe
Yes.
why don't we turn to that one, and then we can look at all three in total and have wrap up conversation.
Okay, sure. And where are we? Okay, the last program is, I think, more logical and I think probably less controversial. So I think that we can get through this pretty quickly. So so coming out of phase 1, fleets are going to play a clear role. There are a lot of fleet vehicles out there. So the purpose of this is knowing from the phase 1 report and just other experience that the project team had, was that just knowing that there are a lot of fleets out there that are not ready or just need more information. The purpose of this project was really looking at what a fleet electrification tech support program could be. So before I get into the bullets there, so the project, the task started, we had interviews with NAFA, so National Associated Fleet Manager, Mid-Atlantic region, 2 people that sit on the board and also own and operate fleets or fleet management companies. They manage 4 fleets. So those discussions were really key to really get an understanding of really the diversity of fleets, from small to large, from, a single location to even like regional or national fleets, but how they operate. It might be, at a local or state level. So all that was really informative for us to just get a better understanding of the fleets. And then on top of that, we did sort of lit review of similar programs in this fleet electrification support to fleets, from utilities across the country and also from some state programs that are out there. So the insights we gained from NAFA and from the research is really what feeds what we're going to talk about here. So why should we even consider having a fleet program? With fleets, I mean, we know that fleets often have high vehicle usage and fuel use and mileage, which correlates to greenhouse gases. It's also, a single decision maker or a smaller set of decision makers that can impact a lot of vehicles. A lot of fleets, even more advanced ones, don't fully understand the vehicles themselves or the charging infrastructure. So there's just a barrier to them really understanding what the vehicles are. They have a lot going on, and learning about a new kind of vehicle, to change their whole operation is really not key to what they're focused on. Utility programs are definitely effective, like the one that PGE has, but the comment about limited impact is really just based on budget. They're only able to hit a certain amount of vehicles, and with a utility program, it might not be designed exactly to fit with what Maryland's goals would be. One of the key findings that we got from both of the NAFA fleet representatives and others that we spoke to was really there's sort of spread of fleets. The larger fleets, ones with more than 200 vehicles, tend to have a dedicated fleet manager who is focused on evaluating the fleet and managing it properly. And larger companies have sustainability goals and things that are driving them to already be considering and figuring out how to electrify their fleet. Smaller fleets do not have that kind of support. They might not even have a fleet manager. So it's really the directive that we got from these folks is really focusing on smaller fleets is really the key to hitting the fleets that wouldn't already be doing it. Sort of the comment that was made with the low income, if we really want this program to affect change, us targeting fleets that wouldn't already be considering electric, especially near term, maybe they just don't think that it's possible, is where we'll get the most benefit. So leverage similar programs. There's a lot of findings, a lot of programs out there, their goals and what they cover as far as like vehicle studies and infrastructure, funding for vehicles or infrastructure post project. It all varies. The report includes a spreadsheet that shows all the different programs, what kind of type that they are, gives a good summary. It was difficult to find exactly, what the fleet component was for some of these because they're just sort of wrapped up into the bigger projects. But the takeaway is that there's a lot of learning that's out there that can be done, in follow-up research and, discussions with the utilities and states to really answer questions for developing a more the program for Maryland. These smaller fleets, since they're not members of NAFA or any other sort of central single industry group, the marketing would really have to be more creative. So targeting if we're talking plumbing, HVAC and electrical things like that, trade associations where these groups are members of, supply houses like Home Depot and Grainger, these are maybe different things than other programs. Really trying to get the program in front of them in a way that they might not happen with just traditional marketing. And then with the low income and with the federal program, federal incentives and stacking is really a lot of the programs really see these fleet electrification services as really a funnel. There's funding on one side from the feds or from the state, or utility for infrastructure of vehicles. So these kind of programs act as a funnel to give them the information that they need to develop an approach for transitioning the fleet. and then lining them up for, pursuing the funding. Okay, so really, like I said, so fleet types and sizes, smaller fleets, anything less than 200 was really the 200 vehicles in fleet was the target. And it's really, I guess, 200 vehicles for a certain location, especially like smaller fleets that aren't, don't have support from a larger organization. Including a couple larger fleets might be useful. I mean, you might get more cost effectiveness, like bang for the buck for greenhouse gas reduction based for each of the fleet studies. Larger fleets might have more name recognition too, for sort of like, program marketing, just sort of like getting the word out there about benefits and, like sharing, the what their savings and their experience was to for enrolling other fleets. Awareness enrollment is what I was mentioning before. So it really has to be a lot broader, and could include radio, social media, wherever, targeting like places and venues that these kind of fleets would be located at. The incentive budget varied for the programs that listed specifically what it was, anywhere between like 12,000 per fleet, and I think 25,000 was the highest. So we recommended 20 as a maximum per fleet, but that's probably more of like a 200 fleet, 200 vehicle fleet. So maybe there's like a scaling based on the size of the fleet, or maybe the diversity in the fleet. If it's all the same kind of vehicle with all same kind of duty cycle, then that could be a more cost-effective study. So we're able to serve more fleets. Modest referral benefit, just sort of word of mouth. If plumber X talks to plumber Y, that might have more weight to over traditional marketing option. And outputs, it's really like the goal was not to, like with $20,000, we would be able to provide a lot of really great information to them to show them that EV is definitely an option for them. Focus on probably near term, next several years worth of vehicles, and it shows them the benefits financially and emission savings from transitioning the vehicles over to electric. Point them to incentives for the vehicles and the charging infrastructure, and maybe even like ways to purchase vehicles, cooperative purchasing and things like that. There's a lot of creative options that are out there and developing. And then also on the charging hardware, essentially it would determine what kind of charging infrastructure, so like a level 2 or DC fast charger, things like that, may or may not be able to give like specific recommendations for like, brand or things like that, but really like type and power, I think, would be the biggest thing. And as far as like implementer, I mean, this is up to Maryland to figure out. I mean, this kind of project could be managed by, like, say, Maryland Energy Administration, and could have like a group of consultants, or even just a single consultant that would do this, or even just to have a solicitation to hire a single implementer outside of MEA, just to handle the program. So, and if we're looking at $20,000 per fleet and about 100 fleets, that's where the $2 million came from. We got a data request from MVA in the first phase of the project, and the second one in the second phase project. The first one was really just looking at new vehicle acquisitions, but it didn't have anything that would designate a fleet. And second phase was really focused on used car. So neither of those data requests had information on fleet types and where they are, but MVA has access to the data and will be able to really do more analysis, behind the wall of MVA to really understand, even where the fleets are, for more targeted marketing to these fleets. So in a nutshell, that is where we are. That's the last slide. So we can open for questions, comments.
I guess I've got one, which is that I'm blanking on the name of the group that came to the MWG maybe almost a year ago now to share the super user concept. And I remember that one of the data points they had was that estimated the average Maryland driver of a light duty vehicle of an ICE vehicle consumes about 500 gallons of gas per year. And then you've got like the top 10% of gasoline users, or the super users, if you will, that consume more than 1,000 gallons of gas per year. When it comes to fleets, I mean, and I know some contractors who are, that boy, they put on some serious mileage.
Right.
Do you have any estimate for the, on a per vehicle basis, the emissions or the fuel use annually by the type of fleets that we're talking about here?
I wish I did, but no. Yeah, and yeah, because there are a lot of fleets that just do tons of driving or even idling at the job site too. None of the requests that we had really give us that kind of information. We didn't find a relevant source, especially for Maryland specific data.
Sure. Okay. One other question. So I certainly see how this has, especially moving these fleets to zero emission vehicles, has some significant emission benefits. Maybe I'm missing something though. Is there a low income component to this recommendation, or this is more focused on emission reduction?
No, so the fleet electrification doesn't have a low income. This is just looking at fleets across Maryland.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and it's like we did look to see if there's any sort of like component or qualification for participating in these other programs that would be like proving X amount of use of fuel to justify being selected by a program, and we did not find anything like that. But that could be included in something like this, because there are some fleets, like you're saying, that drive tons, like HVAC and plumbing and things like that are just always on the road. There are other fleets that have lots of vehicles, but they don't really utilize a lot of the vehicles, so there's a trade-off there.
But Mark, there may be a related issue there. Do fleets include things like taxis that do serve low income?
Yeah, I mean, like here is any single like entity that operates. So if you had a taxi company and they own the vehicles, then they would be considered a fleet.
I would just add quickly for the sake of time that in the low-income section of a report, we identified the crossover with car sharing, right, and ride share. So that's something that we had discussed in previous meetings. So this is where there might be a crossover, right, on the equity side, and we have addressed that in the low-income section of the report.
Gotcha. Okay. So we've got a well-timed hand from James here. We're in the last 10 minutes of the meeting, so this is also when we open up open to questions, comments from MWG members and other members of the public. So go ahead, James.
Okay, thanks. So I might have missed it, but are there any assumptions in these analyses for either the fleet electrification or the low-income incentives? Is there any assumption about the implementation of the advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, given that that rule will be requiring increasing amounts of electric EV sales in the state? So did you make any assumptions about the implementation of that, or
Right.
Is there any accounting for that?
For the fleet side, no. And the timing that we're looking at is over the next 3 years, so it's before ACC2 would really take off. So this is really looking at, making a near-term difference.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Right. And I'll hand it to Miriam if there was any impact on the low income.
No, I would just mention that when we budgeted for the incentives, the hypothesis was reaching that objective, right? We haven't made any recommendation on its implementation, but it's an hypothesis for the budget for the incentive.
I see. I'm sorry, you're talking about in the discussions about the advance clean cars to?
Yeah. So when we said this is how much it could cost to the state of Maryland to provide those incentives, we have taken the hypothesis of the state meeting the Clean Car 2 objectives, right? In terms of how many people will be buying an EV car, and therefore how many people will be receiving a low to moderate income incentive.
I see. Okay, thanks.
So we'll go to Brian and then Jane.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks for this presentation. I'm with Montgomery County, Maryland, in an EV planning specialist role. And I want to share that we have a dealership engagement program that we've been running in the county that includes engagement with dealers. We share the locations of so-called electrified dealers on our website, and we also advertise any promotions or special offers that those dealers are generally offering as well. And I can drop a couple links to that program. But just I want to share as an example of a dealership program that is active in the state of Maryland right now. In terms of some of the elements, the training of dealerships is something we've offered and delivered a couple times. It's hard to say how much value the dealerships are getting out of that. That's something I would love to make sure that we have someone who can speak from a position of experience and with in the auto dealer industry to these salespeople, not someone from government coming in to say, hey, here's how to sell an EV. I think that's one thing that's missing. But we've offered material, sales aids, and generally, we're not pushing too hard. But I think if anybody would like to compare notes or hear more about it, please let me know. I'll drop some links to our program in the chat.
And I would add, Brian, that we mentioned Montgomery County program in the report, so the link should be available in the report as well.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks for joining us today. Jane.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the chance to speak. I wasn't able to listen into the whole meeting, but I wanted to jump in to comment on the Maryland Climate Pathway report. I should also say I'm a Maryland resident. I live in downtown Silver Spring. I'm also the co-chair of the Maryland Sierra Club's Transportation Committee. So I'm really grateful for this report. It shows that our current policies aren't enough. And the policies as a part of the climate pathway will be able to get to 49% emission reduction in the transportation sector by 2031. However, there's still a need to create more specific and ambitious targets for vehicle miles traveled reductions specifically. Currently in the pathways modeled scenario, the average annual VMT growth is 1% between 2025 and 2030 compared to 2% under current policies. And so there's no reduction necessarily. But experts in transportation policy that have been doing this climate modeling elsewhere have shown that we need to significantly reduce VMT in order, along with having really aggressive EV adoption plans in order to meet those greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. This includes research from the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board Climate Mitigation Study. They found that a 20% per capita reduction in light duty VMT was needed to reach their goals. The Rocky Mountain Institute found that the US as a whole needs a 20% reduction in VMT per capita by 2030 to meet the 1.5 Celsius pathway, along with EV adoption. And then finally, the California Air Resources Board found that California needed a 25% VMT reduction by 2030 and 30% reduction by 2045 to achieve its goals in combination with the country's most aggressive EV adoption plan. So in closing, we would like to see that the VMT reduction targets should be incorporated into the Pathways report's modeling to show us, what is truly needed to get the transportation emissions reduction to zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Are there any other comments from the MWG or members of the public really on any of the content of today's meeting. And as you prepare to put your hand up for final comments, thank you again to Energetics and VEIC for sharing that information. This is, of course, not the end of the MWG's discussion about these recommendations. We got a lot of content shared today. Our plan, just as we did some months ago at the staff level in terms of our staff support of the MWG, is to try to put some of these concepts together in a discussion draft kind of policy proposal. You might remember some months ago we circulated something for additional discussion and feedback. My team will kind of brush that off, refresh it with some of these new ideas, and bring that to the MWG possibly for the next meeting. Can't promise that we can hit that deadline, but we definitely want to keep things moving in this direction to help the MWG come up with a recommendation for the state's EV incentive program. Last couple minutes here on the meeting. Any final questions, comments?
You might just want to mention, Mark, that on the pathway model, this is just the start of public comment and outreach. That MD's got a whole series of briefings and outreach planned.
Great flag. Yeah, I should have thought of that during my updates earlier. We will be going around the state this summer, and we have several of those dates confirmed on our website. So let me just put that in the chat. Oh, Susan already did that. Thanks, Susan. So yeah, the first public listening session to get additional input on the pathway report is at Bowie State University, July 25th, a little less than 2 weeks from now. Then in Hagerstown on August 8th, at Salisbury on August 19th, Morgan State University on September 12th, and we'll have at least a couple of virtual sessions. Also working on scheduling a presentation in Southern Maryland. So do check our website for updates on the timing and specific locations for each of those listening sessions. Well, Mike, I'm not seeing any further questions or comments, so I'll hand it to you to close it out today.
No, yeah, I thank the people for attendance. I mean, at some point we had over 70 people listening. Obviously, this is something where there's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of regulations involved. There's a lot of changes involved. So the more input that we can get on this, the better. Thank you all.
Thanks. See you all in August.
Thank you.